Let's get centered. I'm Louis Miranda. As millions of Americans head out for their last symbolic weekend of the summer, we've got a lighter post with quick highlights, and we'll return with a full episode with Carl and Jeremy next week. Now, there is one group of Americans, though, who won't be traveling with their family or friends this weekend, and that's the 5,000 National Guardsmen that have been mobilized to Washington, D.C. for Donald Trump's federal takeover. CNN reported yesterday that the deployment is costing taxpayers roughly $1 million a day for housing, travel, food, fuel, and other needs. Like everything else about this deployment, though, there's a lack of transparency and clarity of intent. And that estimate had to come from experts reviewing data on past deployments because the Pentagon and National Guard are not providing costs or estimates to the public, something they've done previously for other deployments. But the deployments are about more than the cost. So I took some time to go see the Guardsmen in action and to get perspective from some of them and from some of those protesting. Here's a little bit of what I saw. I heard from young Guardsmen from South Carolina patrolling DuPont Circle who were happy to see the city and how beautiful it is. They've not seen any real trouble. They have, though, been confronted by angry DC residents who don't want a military deployment in their streets, and one of them told me he had been spit on. Now, I don't like that Trump and their governor sent them out for this, but spitting on them is not right. A group from Louisiana patrolling by the Washington Monument had little to say as sunbathers, cyclists, and joggers enjoyed some afternoon sunshine. There, though, I met a woman named Pat who was so incensed about the deployment that she packed her bags in Maine and got to DC quickly to protest. On her own, in the sun, for however long she could, and holding a sign that reads, "What do you stand for?" on one side, and a reminder of the service members who've died to protect and defend the Constitution and American democracy on the other. Pat told me how she tried to make eye contact early on, but for a while the Guardsmen did their best to avoid looking in her direction. Eventually they did, though. She told me that she reminded them that she had freedom of speech and that it was a civil conversation. Some Guardsmen on patrol moved swiftly around the perimeter. Some closer to the monument stood in small groups and smiled and waved at the tourist. Pat knows they're following orders, but she doesn't like seeing military uniforms carrying long guns on America's streets because, as she told me, if something happens, who are they going to turn those automatic weapons on? Americans, she emphasized firmly. That sentiment was echoed by a group of veterans who set up camp in front of Union Station, DC's main train terminal, where West Virginia Guardsmen patrolled. The veterans, mostly from the DC metro area, said they will be there protesting until the Guardsmen go. Rig, an Army veteran with multiple deployments since the 1990s, including to Kosovo, Iraq, and Afghanistan, carried a black American flag. He told me that the veterans represent every branch and that they reject the military occupation of America they're seeing. He said their position is simple. The military should not be ordered to conduct law enforcement on American soil. It sets up the potential for mistakes, for confrontations, for tragedy, he told me. Already early in their deployment, an armored vehicle outfitted for dangerous deployments overseas ran a red light and T-boned a car that had broken no rule. It was an honest mistake, but it illustrated what Patton Rigg and his fellow veterans are worried about. Certainly, there were others who periodically walked by and thanked the Guardsmen. Some feel safer to have them in the city, but the tension and the potential for those mistakes that Rigg talked about is real. Back at DuPont Circle, one of the South Carolina Guardsmen acknowledged that, frankly, they're in the nicer areas of the city. We're freeing up the DC police, he told me, so they can go into the other neighborhoods. He was certainly genuine in his belief of that. But here's the thing. DuPont Circle is usually a pretty safe place anyway. So is the Washington Monument. So is the National Mall. So why deny these Guardsmen their Labor Day? And why make taxpayers foot the bill? Well, to be seen. Whether tensions will increase, whether more Americans step out to protest. But what's happening in DC is an experiment, as we've said in this space before. It's about testing the limits and normalizing the presence of military in American cities as a tool of domestic political conflict. That's the real danger. That's why it's worth noting that Gavin Newsome's trolling of Donald Trump is exactly right on tone and substance. He held a press conference with visuals and a style that mimics the Donald's unusual mannerisms. And in that gimmick, he highlighted better than any data posted on any credible media outlet that there are cities in red states with much higher crime rates. And his urging of the president to tackle the rampant crime in places like Louisiana cuts through. We have to keep reminding the American public, none of this was ever about the crime. Now, turning to Minnesota. Just a few weeks ago, we had former Minnesota State Senator Melissa Lopez Franson on when state legislators and their spouses were gunned down in their own homes in her state. This week, Minnesotans lived through another tragic shooting, this time at a Catholic school during their first mass of the school year. It claimed the lives of 2 children and injured 17 others. As Melissa pointed out when we spoke a few weeks ago, There's a right to bear arms, but in that instance, one of the state legislators was shot 8 times and their spouse 9 times in a matter of seconds. At Annunciation Catholic School, the assailant used a high-powered rifle. Elected officials can and must do more to put common sense safety measures in place, including banning bump stocks once and for all. There had already been 44 school shootings in the United States as of Wednesday of this week, more than 80 in each of the last 3 years. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey was right. Thoughts and prayers aren't enough. Now, to close out and wish everyone a great Labor Day weekend, let's remember that this holiday was established to honor the American labor movement. Labor unions have played a critical role fighting for fair wages and job security, and they built up the American middle class. The right to collective bargaining, though, is under attack. We're linking to remarks made by the president of the AFL-CIO earlier this week, highlighting what workers are up against. It's a worthwhile listen and a good way to pass the time as you travel. Now, keep in mind, the Transportation Security Administration, TSA, reported that nearly 17.4 million travelers are expected to be screened at airports between yesterday, Thursday, the 28th of August, and Wednesday, September 3rd. Almost 3 million of those, 2.91 million to be exact, expected just today. That would mark the busiest holiday travel weekend in the history of the TSA. So give yourself a little more time when heading to the airport. And safe travels, enjoy the long weekend, and we'll see you next week with a full episode. And for our listeners, don't forget to subscribe, hit that subscribe button, share, and thank you for your support. See you next week. Our panel featured Louis Miranda, former Obama White House communications advisor and former spokesperson at DHS, Carl Meacham, former Clinton appointee and a former senior Republican staff on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and Jeremy Murphy, former CBS executive, author, and publicist.